Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on a very special edition of the Purple Coffee podcast. I'm delighted to be joined by David Okuniev. I hope I've got that quite well. I was trying in the pre-recording to get it right and I butchered it a few times. So David, how did I do?
Yeah, you did very well.
Am I getting there?
Very,
This
very.
is good. This is good. My Yorkshire tones don't always go too well with complex last names, but we're getting there. And I'm joined by David because Typeform, and he is one of the founders of Typeform, are one of the chapter partners of The Successful Mistake, a book that I am writing, as the majority of people may know by now. And I first came across Typeform through a friend of mine, Guy Vincent, who said, oh, you should definitely use this to get some opinions from your readers and to help choose the title and the cover. So I tried it. And I thought I would use it just once like I do with many tools and that would be it. But there was something about Typeform that definitely got my imagination picked. Not just making the process of creating surveys and forms and various kind of pages like that exciting for myself, but it seemed to really hit a nerve with readers and audience members too. So Typeform's a tool that I'm very excited to use, not just now but going into the future. And when it came to trying to get sponsors for The Successful Mistake, I reached out to David and they were very excited to come on board. So David, I'm going to pass things over to you now so you can tell us a little bit more about Typeform and what it is that you do, and also why you chose to become part of the Successful Mistake journey.
Sure. Well, basically, Typeform is a tool that allows you to create beautiful next generation forms, which you can use for a bunch of use cases, from surveys to registration forms to shopping to checkout processes to quizzes, etc. What we did a few years ago was basically look at what forms look like, and we thought they were quite boring. So we basically stripped away everything we knew about forms and came with something fresh, which was based more on a conversational format, whereby you ask one question at a time. The fonts are larger. It's all very, very much more human as a process. And yeah, I mean, the great thing about it is that it actually it engages users much more in the process of data collection. It's no longer like, oh, I've got to fill in this boring form. It's like, there's a kind of gamification aspect to it that actually draws users in and makes them get to the end.
Yeah, I think the key word that you said there is engage. I felt very engaged when I first kind of tried out the demo. And it wasn't just engaging from a person filling in the form, but for myself creating the form too. And like you say, I've used so many of these kind of tools for creating contact forms and surveys, and they do tend to be quite boring and it's a bit of a chore.
Yeah,
But there's something about
yeah.
Typeform which makes it more of an adventure. So that's good.
Yeah, I think because most of the tools out there are kind of pretty legacy and quite old. And we've come at it from a different angle. Myself and my co-founders both ran design agencies before we ran Typeform. So we brought in a fresh kind of aspect to what form should be from the UI and the user experience level.
Cool. Well, I want to learn a bit more about the features and how you specifically feel they can help entrepreneurs, because the book, The Successful Mistake, is largely for entrepreneurs and tomorrow's
Sure.
entrepreneur. But before we do that, I'm personally quite intrigued to know why you decided to come on board with The Successful Mistake and myself.
So
You know a bit
I
about
don't
the
know.
book,
I
so
don't think I have a great answer to that. I was just kind of intuition, and you kind of made a good pitch to me, and you had an interesting moustache as well at the time, and and so I thought, why not? It looked like an interesting project to support, and it made sense for us. So we were more than happy to help.
this is exciting. And I know that you know a little bit about the book and the fact that it's around
Yeah,
about
I've
mistakes. I'm sure you've
shared.
made lots.
Yeah, you shared a part of a chapter with me, and it looks really well written, and I'm excited to read the rest of it.
Excellent. And I'm very excited to have you start off the opening chapter as well. You're going to be actually writing the opening
Yeah.
part of the chapter, sharing a couple of your own mistakes. Without going into too much detail, can you just give us an insight into how you perceive mistakes and how they've helped you grow as an entrepreneur and as a worker and as a man?
Oh, so it's you learn so much from mistakes because I mean basically we myself and my co-founder weren't business people. We didn't understand much about how to run a business at all. But what we did understand was product. So that's what sort of drove us to actually create a startup. But the amount of mistakes that we made on the way because we had no clue how to run a business, they were essential for us to like bounce back and learn. And now we feel much more comfortable with running a business. But it took a while, and it took several full steps in order to actually understand where we were going wrong. So making mistakes is super important. I think you should just make sure you just make them early on, because the later on you make them, the more costly I guess it is.
But like you say, especially for someone like a software developer, it's just part of the iterative process. You make a mistake which helps the next product be a little bit better, and then
Sure.
the next one and the next one.
Sure. Well, on software it works a bit more differently, because if you make some early mistakes, then you will pay for it later for sure. Because if you build something which isn't stable enough, you're gonna have to rebuild it later. So I mean, there's different degrees. I think in business, on the business side of things, I think you can recuperate quite quickly and adjust yourself from mistakes. But on the software front, it's more difficult. I would
Well,
say that.
Well, I've got to say, I'm very excited to read your chapter when you start sending them through to me. I think you'll have a fantastic insight into mistakes, and not just your own personal ones, but how Typeform have grown. So, just moving it back onto the audience and the kind of people who will be reading the book. Largely entrepreneurs, new entrepreneurs, those who are in the early days of the process. Typeform is a tool that can help many type of businesses, many type of people. But how
Yeah.
specifically can it help today and tomorrow's entrepreneurs?
Sure. But the way I see Typeform, or forms in general, it's a way to actually have a conversation with someone without actually sharing the same space and time. So with a standard form, it's hard to get people engaged. But if you can have that, non-presential conversation through a type form, then you can gather all kinds of feedback, which is essential for you at the beginning of any new business. So it can go from validating a business idea to even asking users what's their favorite logo by just sharing a few pictures and getting people to vote. Uh, I think a type form is just a really, really, useful way to make that early connection with your initial users. And also, since you can, do a bit of branding inside, you also create that brand connection with them at the same time. So we actually have loads of early stage startups that use Typeform, because it's also a really early way to do to create some kind of MVP. I've even seen actually businesses just based around threading a couple of type forms together. There was this one business called Ghostwriter.io, which it was a type form which was collecting all the information as far as what you would like in the letter and how you want it written, and you would submit, and that's it. That was the service, and they would write a handwritten letter for you. So I think it was. I'm not sure about the URL, by the way, in case like you guys are searching for it, but it was something of that sort. And we've seen, other people, use Typeform to create Slack communities, for example, using it as a registration form to get into a Slack community, and essentially. That's their whole business. They're charging people to get into a certain Slack community and using a Typeform as the front end for that.
Hmm. I mean, there's loads of different uses because, like you say, it can be used to get your audience and your customers registered and on board onto a process in the
Yeah,
same way as people have in the past used Google Docs,
yeah,
which,
yeah.
as I'm sure many people will agree with
The
me,
thing
are
about
quite boring.
it's fine. It works fine, but it doesn't feel that you're part of it. You wouldn't put
Yeah.
up a Google Docs as a website, but you might put up a Typeform just as your website,
Mm.
as a landing page, basically.
But as a storyteller and someone who's really into the sort of branding and the forming relationships with customers, what really got me excited about the whole Typeform is just that way that it really brings you closer. Like you say, you don't necessarily have to have a one-on-one conversation with your customer, but you can send out an email, direct them to a Typeform, and you can constantly learn more about your product, more about them, and start those two-way conversations, but use a form
Yeah.
as the
And I think
intermediary.
from your perspective, what you were able to do with Typeform is wear your brand on your sleeve, like show your personality basically by actually putting your colors, your logo, a video of yourself inside the Typeform, etc. So people felt closer to you, and that's why they were more likely to engage. It's all about making the experience more human. If you can do that, then you're going to always get a better response.
Absolutely. And I suppose, especially for the new entrepreneur and that person who is starting a business and you're in the early days, that communication that you're having with your customer, with your audience, is so important because if all you're doing is creating a product that you think is going to be good, then you're going to run into a trouble. But if you are building a product that you know is going to be good because you're talking to those who are going to use it, then you're straight away off to a great start.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, just I know that when we've spoken in the past, you told me about some features that I personally wasn't that aware of, and I started talking about the survey tool and how I used it, and you said, well, actually, you could also do X, Y, and Z. So, just as a quick overview, could you just tell us about some of the more hidden features that people aren't maybe as aware of, but could really help an entrepreneur connect with their audience?
Well, I think our most important feature is probably logic. That's the ability to thread to different questions based on the previous answer. So with logic, you can really like let your imagination fly in terms of, how, what you want the flow to be. And then there's other things you can also do as far as like that thread into logic. For example, you can use a feature called calculator, which allows you to add uh, weights to different answers. And based on you adding those answers together at the end of the form, you could show a different score. So that would allow you to create a quiz, for example, if you wanted to create a quick test, or maybe just thread people to different endings based on do you know BuzzFeed, what they do when you that kind of BuzzFeed
Yeah.
questionnaire when they ask you, they kind of show you a result at the end based on a final score. So you can do the same thing with Typeform. There's also a good feature called hidden fields, which allows you to pass variables through the URL. So you could, if you were sending out a mail shot to all your users and wanted to make it more personal, you could actually address them by their first name by just passing through the URL their first name, so that when they load their type form, they can see their first name.
Oh wow.
Uh, and also, so we have payments integrated with Stripe with Typeform, so you can actually collect a payment through a Typeform, as long as you sign up for a Stripe account.
So an entrepreneur could really kind of bring this and integrate in part of their funnel, by
Yeah,
based on what
absolutely.
kind of answer the person gives, they are turned into customer X or customer Y or customer Z, and then they're given different questions based on that. So you can really go deep.
Yeah, and actually we have two products. One is Typeform.com, which is a WYSIWYG builder, uh, which allows you to easily build a type form and send it out. So we have a new product which we just released in beta a week and a half ago. It's called Typeform.io, and it's an API for building type forms. So with Typeform.com, the idea is that you create a type form. It's one type form which goes out to many people. So with Typeform.io, the concept is a bit different. It's a type form for each person. So based on your internal logic, you will package together uh, some conditions that will actually put different types of questions together, depending on the data you have of the user. So one example of this would be an e-commerce, or sorry, a shop or someone selling a bunch of products. They want to follow up the week after with a type form, which was going to ask them specific questions about the specific products they bought, and maybe about whether, let's say, if the goods had arrived late, that the form should be aware of the fact that it was late. Or if it's a certain time of the year, maybe the type form would be adapted. So if you want to do any of this dynamic stuff, and you're a developer or you have development resources in your team, then Typeform.io can be a really transformational product as far as being able to get much more granular with the conversation through a form.
Wow, that's very exciting. Again, it just comes into this whole idea of personalization and customizing it for the audience. So I mean, I think we've just about covered everything, but before we end up and say our goodbyes, can you just share a little bit about what we can get excited about from Typeform coming up to the summer, and also where
Yeah.
someone can find out more information?
So right now we're working on a new feature called Teams. So if you're working with Typeform in Teams, that will be a good one for you. We're also, we carry on to improve the product, trying to make the forms faster. We've, especially in some of the kind of harder to get places in the world, so we're putting a lot of effort into that. And just some, continuing on small features, improvements to our calculator feature, for example, and also a full release of Typeform IO coming within the next 2 months.
Excellent. And people can find out more and sign up and start using Typeform where? Tell us about the
So,
URLs.
so Typeform.com if you're not a developer, and Typeform.io if you are a developer and want to dabble with the API. It's an open beta, so you can come in. And by the way, just so everyone knows, Typeform is a freemium tool. So we have a pro offering, but you can do a lot for free on Typeform. So I encourage anyone to just try it out.
You sure can. I encourage everyone who's listening and watching to check it out if you haven't already. And if you are on my part of my email list and everything, you've probably already used a Typeform and come across it, because I've used it several times and I love it, love it, love it. So David, thank you so much, not just for jumping on call with me right now, but for supporting the successful mistake and being part of the journey. I cannot
Sure.
wait to read your chapter opening. There's going to be some fantastic insights into mistakes from you, I am sure. And I just can't wait to involve you in the whole process. So cheers.
Looking forward to it too.
All right. So from me and David, a big howdy and goodbye. Cheers, man.